Whiskey Friday Academy, episode 2. We are here with the Dundon, Charles Dundon, co-founder of Dundon Motorsports, with myself. Lucky to have met him very early on in my Porsche journey. He is a fountain of knowledge, so much of a fountain that we have to put a cap on it sometimes so that we can move on to the next question. So we're going to do our best to move through this. This is engine basics. For some of you, it's going to be review. For some of y'all, we're going to blow your mind with some facts. Not some bullshit, but some facts. Things like plastic intakes are better than metal intakes. What? 981 dry sump oiling is a myth. Finger followers failed due to lubrication, not different DLC suppliers or metallurgical problems or any of that stuff that you've been sold a few years ago. Equal length headers are impossible. Say that, at least to be made correctly. It's a marketing gimmick. In essence, we're going to go through what are the components of an engine, starting at the most basic, trying to give you names and pictures, like this dingle-dangle here in the middle. This is actually from a 991.1
yes.
GT3? Yeah, 991.1 GT3 engine. So we're going to go rotating assembly. That's crankshaft, piston, rods, rings. We'll touch on harmonics, how it's affected, Metzgers, maybe a little bit about some of the DFI engines. We'll get into valve train. This is overhead cam specifics. We're not going to talk about your LS engines, don't care. Cams, lifters, hydraulic and solid lifters, rocker arms, finger followers, how valve actuation goes, and we're going to cover this shit really fast. So if you end up with questions or want to know more, come back at us in the comments, come back at us with questions. We're happy to go on for a long time about it, because each one of these topics can be hours all by themselves. We're not trying to teach y'all how to build an engine or how to design an engine. We're just trying to define it for some of the captains of industry that are in finance or doctors or lawyers or surgeons or whatever and love cars, but never really paid much attention to the fact that besides pouring dead dinosaurs in the gas tank and making cool brat noises as you go down the road, that there's a whole bunch of shit that happens in the middle. We'll go into lubrication. This is a whole field of study unto itself. Many billions of dollars are spent on this on its own, so we're going to touch on it. Oil pumps, bearings, bearing clearances, catch cans. Catch cans are a no-no in a lot of cases. You like some lubrication on the cylinder walls. Charles has some more stories about that. Dry sump versus wet sump, i.e. why 981 718 GT4 engines are kinda GT cars. It's not hating on Caymans, but the GT4 RS is really a GT car. The rest of them, kinda GT cars. Cooling, not air-cooled. This is a misnomer, and some of you air-cooled guys will like hate on this. Your car's oil-cooled. All cars are air-cooled. They all exchange with air. So they're all fucking air-cooled. Every car ever has been air-cooled. Even the electric ones are air-cooled, for God's sake, or they burst into flames. So, oil-cooled, water-cooled, what goes on in a radiator, why it's important, what's a thermostat, why do you have a thermostat, is warming up your car hurting the environment? Maybe. Is it good for your car? Yeah, probably. I know these boys do it every fucking time they jump in a car, and I don't, but I don't care. So, fueling, low pressure fuel pumps, high pressure fuel pumps, injectors, both port and DFI, and I'm reading this list and like, we're never getting through this in 2 hours. Mass airflow, MAP sensors, absolute pressure sensors, modeled versus measured load, O2 sensors, the feedback loop for fueling. So, some of this stuff we'll dive in a little bit, we'll touch on it. That your individual throttle bodies in your 992 GT3, your GT4 RS, and your GT3 RS are all sold for performance, but they're really for what?
Emissions.
Emissions! They're for what? Damn you, California! What the hell? We'll go through ignition, coils, spark plugs, dwell. Not really something you play with much in a coil on plug electronic, but it's still there. And we can learn something from the old distributor days with it, especially when you're tuning a car from scratch. We can talk about ignition advance. We can talk about flame speed, which brings in questions about compression ratio. So not exactly the right place for compression ratio. That's more backup and rotating assembly pistons, but it has its effects on ignition and flame speed and octane and that kind of shit. Intake, why a plastic intake is better, why there's flaps in your intake, why ITBs are for emissions. We'll talk a little bit about the waves bouncing around in the intake, why those are things you don't want to ignore, and they are things that explain why you can have a higher volumetric efficiency in your engine. We'll even touch on what volumetric efficiency is. So if you guys catch us using lingo, and Charles and I use it all the time, we know what each other are talking about, and other people might not know. And anybody in the peanut gallery that's listening, if we use lingo, speak up. So we can be like, hey, what the fuck's that mean? And this is a PG-13 rated show. We won't be showing boobies, but we should probably not have little ones listening unless they have heard some engineering embellishment words in the past. So bouncing waves in the intake runner, the interaction of waves from bank to bank, and how flaps are there both to enhance it and cancel it. This is getting into what we're going to be calling our engine 201. That we'll get into a little bit more details about how Dundon makes power and how we use some of these things, manipulate them in such a way to gain more out of it. We'll talk a little bit about exhaust components, headers, long tube versus tune length. Everybody wants to call them long tube. That seems to have been a thing at some point, that they're better. Yeah, they're longer, but they're longer to a certain extent, because longer than long isn't necessarily better. So there's a point in which it gets worse, and you need to find the right length, not just make them long. Secondary length, this is something that we've been working on, that Charles has known the whole time, but I've come to know here in probably the last 3 or 4 years as being incredibly important for exhaust design, and has a pretty substantial influence on a lot of the other things that are happening in the intake and other things. What a catalyst is, why removing a catalyst from your car or an OPF or other things is not going to make you 40 wheel horsepower, even though some of our competition will go crying home to mama when we bust them up with thermodynamics and some science to prove that that's just a bunch of, as Gail Banks would say, bullshit. You're welcome, Philip. Last thing is muffler. Why valves in a muffler are important, why having different chambers in a muffler are important, what resonance is, some of that kind of stuff. We'll try and touch on all this. Next time we're going to talk about what are the 4 cycles in an engine. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow. There are more technical terms for it, but you guys have probably heard those before. Differential pressure being the key, what's volumetric efficiency. Octane makes the fuel burn slower? What the fuck? I thought octane made more power. How's burn slower make more power? What are you talking about? What's knock? How's that different from pre-ignition? And this one that's like a whole fucking book. That's not even an hour-long conversation. And we're gonna get rage from the comment section from guys that think they know what they're talking about with that. So, fancy injection tricks we'll go over with DFI, because it goes in at high pressure. It atomizes very quickly, and you can do double ignition, triple ignition. You can cool off the cylinder in interesting ways. Why is having a cool cylinder important? Et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully I'm seeing you guys with a whole bunch of fucking questions that you're like, whoa, 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 I'm getting punch drunk over here. What are you talking about? I don't know what the fuck is going on. What are you guys talking about? So we'll go through the second section. We'll not publish a 3-hour YouTube, because nobody would watch past the first 30 minutes. They'd be like,
Scroll.
exactly. These guys are fucking boring. They're just high on whiskey.